They built an empire of terror, war, and genocide, ruling through fear, sending millions to their deaths, convinced their empire would last 1,000 years. But in the end, all they got was a cell, a trial, and a rope. This is how the most powerful Nazi leaders met their end after World War II. From commanding armies across continents to standing trial with nothing but fear in their eyes. This is how the top Nazi leaders were hunted down, stripped of power, and brought to justice after World War II. And the final words they left behind. Martin Bormann was one of Adolf Hitler's most powerful and mysterious figures during World War II. As head of the Nazi Party Chancellery and Hitler's private secretary, he controlled access to the Führer, Hitler himself. He was the gatekeeper to Hitler and wielded enormous influence. The circumstances of Bormann's death were full of mystery for decades. This is because, as the Third Reich collapsed in late April 1945, Bormann was among those trapped in Hitler's Berlin bunker. When Hitler committed suicide on April 30th, Bormann remained, participating in the attempted transition of power. However, after Hitler's death, Admiral Karl Dönitz was named his successor, but Berlin was falling rapidly to Soviet forces. So on May 1st, Bormann and a small group, including SS Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger and Hitler youth leader Arthur Axmann, attempted to flee the bunker and escape Soviet capture. But during the escape, things got very strange. According to Arthur Axmann, the head of the Hitler Youth and one of the few survivors from the final escape attempt out of the Führer bunker, the group that included Martin Bormann, SS physician Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger, and several others left the bunker late on May 1st, 1945. Their objective was to cross the Spree River through the Weidendammer Bridge and reach the northwest of Berlin to escape the invading Soviets. But it was no easy journey. The group came under heavy Soviet fire while crossing the bridge. Several members were killed during the attempt. Axmann reported that after becoming separated, he took a different route and later discovered two bodies, whom he identified as Bormann and Stumpfegger, lying near the railway tracks adjacent to the Lehrter Bahnhof in central Berlin. Despite Axmann's testimony, no bodies were recovered at the time by Allied or Soviet forces, and Bormann's fate remained officially unconfirmed. On October 1st, 1946, the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg sentenced Bormann to death in absentia for crimes against humanity and war crimes. His conviction was based on documented evidence of his central administrative role in Nazi policies, including the persecution of Jews, the exploitation of forced labor, and coordination of Nazi racial laws. However, in December 1972, during construction work near Lehrter RR Station, now Berlin Hauptbahnhof, human remains were discovered. Approximately 12 meters from the location Axmann had described, the remains were buried under rubble and concrete debris from collapsed structures and wartime destruction. To confirm if it was truly Bormann's remains, dental records provided by Dr. Hugo Blaschke, Hitler's personal dentist, were used by West German authorities. After the test, they identified one of the skeletons as belonging to Martin Bormann, and the other was identified as Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger. However, there's more to the story. Chemical analysis of the soil surrounding the remains detected traces of cyanide, a pill that offered the option of suicide rather than capture. To confirm the previous identification results, German authorities conducted DNA testing on the skull believed to be Bormann's in 1998. The DNA profile matched that of a living relative, Bormann's daughter, who had provided a sample, confirming the identity with scientific certainty. The German government officially declared Bormann dead, based on the 1972 findings, and his remains were cremated in 1999. The ashes were scattered in the Baltic Sea by German authorities, preventing the establishment of any grave site. Yet Bormann was not the only one to escape the hangman by doing what they believed was going down on their own terms. After Hitler's suicide, one man saw a window of opportunity, Hermann Göring. Once Hitler's right-hand man, Göring was confident that with the Führer gone, he should be the one to take control. But instead of rising to power, his final days would be full of betrayal, humiliation, and an unexpected death behind bars. Göring was a decorated World War I fighter pilot, early Nazi Party member, and by the height of the Third Reich, arguably the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany. He founded the Gestapo, led the Air Force, and oversaw the four-year plan, making him central to Nazi economic and military policy. His crimes were violent and dark. He signed the order initiating the Holocaust's final solution, coordinated looting across occupied Europe, and ran forced labor programs. He lived in obscene luxury, collecting stolen art and wearing custom uniforms, while millions suffered. By 1945, his reputation was ruined. The Nazi Air Force had failed to protect Germany from Allied bombing raids, and Hitler had grown distant and critical. Still, Göring assumed that once Hitler was incapacitated, leadership would naturally fall to him. On April 23, 1945, while Hitler was trapped in the Berlin bunker, Göring sent a telegram suggesting he take over. However, Hitler saw it as a betrayal. In a rage, he stripped Göring of his titles and ordered his arrest. Just like that, the man who once stood directly beneath Hitler was now branded a traitor. SS guards placed him under house arrest at his mountain estate in Bavaria. But when Hitler died a week later, the Nazi hierarchy fell into chaos. Göring was released and quickly surrendered to American forces on May 6th. Hoping to negotiate leniency, he portrayed himself as a rational statesman who had tried to end the war. What followed was Göring's final performance in the Nuremberg trials. He was arrogant, sharp, and often smug, answering charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity as if he were still giving orders. Despite his courtroom theatrics, the evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty and sentenced to hang. But Göring had one last trick. On the night of October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, he bit down on a hidden cyanide capsule and died in his cell. His death occurred at approximately 10:44 p.m., just 2 hours before he was due to be hanged. American guards discovered his lifeless body in cell number 5 of Nuremberg prison. An immediate investigation was launched, and an autopsy confirmed cyanide poisoning as the cause of death. No one knows for certain how he got the poison. Some believe it was smuggled in by a guard. Others think he had hidden it all along. Göring robbed the Allies of their public execution and died on his own terms, just as he had planned. For a man who had built his life on power, access, and control, it was a final, calculated move. And with his death, another pillar of the Nazi regime crumbled into infamy. Despite the disruption caused by Göring, preparations for the executions continued as planned. After midnight, the remaining condemned men were served their last meal. The meal consisted of cold cuts and sausage, black bread, potato salad, and tea. According to official accounts, the prisoners did not eat together. Each man remained in his cell, and the food was brought individually. Some ate, while others declined most of their meal. Hans Frank, for instance, reportedly touched very little of the food. Others, like Wilhelm Keitel and Alfred Jodl, ate sparingly and appeared deep in contemplation. At approximately 1:10 a.m. on October 16, 1946, the executions commenced inside the gymnasium of the Nuremberg prison. The U.S. Army had erected 3 temporary gallows for the hangings. However, only 2 were actively used. One served as a backup. The executions were carried out by Master Sergeant John C. Woods and his assistant, military policeman Joseph Malta. The U.S. Army employed the standard drop method, which was shorter than the British long drop. This resulted in several executions being prolonged. The executions proceeded in a specific order, starting with Joachim von Ribbentrop and ending with Arthur Seyss-Inquart. Joachim von Ribbentrop served as Nazi Germany's foreign minister from 1938 to 1945 and was one of Adolf Hitler's closest diplomatic advisors. Originally a wine merchant with limited political experience, Ribbentrop rose quickly within the Nazi Party due to his loyalty to Hitler and his early membership in the NSDAP, Nazi Party, joining in 1932. Ribbentrop played a pivotal role in shaping Nazi foreign policy and was a chief architect of some of the most critical international agreements that empowered Nazi aggression. Most notably, he negotiated the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Union in August 1939. This non-aggression treaty, which included secret protocols to divide Poland and other Eastern European countries, gave Hitler the green light to invade Poland on September 1, 1939, effectively triggering World War II. In addition to enabling the start of the war, Ribbentrop was deeply complicit in the regime's war crimes and atrocities. At the International Military Tribunal IMT in Nuremberg, he was indicted and convicted on all 4 counts: crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit the above crimes. As foreign minister, Ribbentrop used his position to facilitate Germany's military aggression and negotiate alliances, such as with Italy and Japan. He also ensured the deportation of Jews from German-occupied territories to extermination camps. He maintained diplomatic cover for Nazi genocidal policy and was present at meetings where the final solution was discussed and implemented. Evidence presented at the Nuremberg trials showed Ribbentrop's role in ordering and endorsing the deportation of Jews from France, Hungary, and other occupied nations. He instructed German diplomats to press local governments to surrender their Jewish populations to the SS. He also helped orchestrate the exploitation of occupied nations and was directly linked to policies involving forced labor. On October 16, 1946, he was the first of the 10 condemned men to be executed. Prior to his hanging, Ribbentrop was reported to have been calm. As he mounted the gallows, his last words were, "God protect Germany. God have mercy on my soul. My final wish is that Germany should recover her unity, and that, for the sake of peace, there should be an understanding between East and West. I wish peace to the world." According to eyewitness reports and later documentation, his neck did not break immediately, and he struggled on the rope for approximately 16 minutes. He was pronounced dead at 1:11 a.m. Wilhelm Keitel was the chief of the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, or German Armed Forces High Command, from 1938 until the end of World War II in 1945. As one of Adolf Hitler's most loyal and senior military officials, Keitel effectively served as the top military bureaucrat in Nazi Germany, acting as the conduit through which Hitler's directives were passed to the German armed forces. Keitel joined the German army in 1901 and steadily rose through the ranks. He became chief of the OKW in 1938 after the Blomberg-Fritsch affair led to the purging of independent military leadership. From that point on, Keitel's role was less as a military strategist and more as Hitler's administrative tool. He became known among his peers as a sycophant, even earning the derisive nickname Laketel, a pun meaning both lackey and a play on his last name. In Nuremberg, Keitel was indicted and convicted on all 4 major counts, which included crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit the above crimes. Keitel's criminal liability stemmed from his direct authorization and enforcement of policies that violated international law. As chief of OKW, he signed and issued numerous orders resulting in the mass execution of prisoners of war, civilians, and resistance fighters. In June 1941, he gave the Commissar Order, which authorized German troops to summarily execute Soviet political commissars. He also gave the Night and Fog Decree, which ordered the disappearance and secret execution of resistance fighters in occupied countries in December 1941. And there's more. Keitel also played a key role in the planning and execution of aggressive wars, including the invasions of Poland, France, and the Soviet Union. He signed the German surrender on May 8, 1945 in Berlin. On October 16, 1946, Keitel was the second man executed by hanging in the gymnasium of Nuremberg prison. According to witnesses, Keitel attempted to maintain a soldierly bearing and requested to be shot as a military man, a request that was denied. As he stood on the gallows, his final words were, "I call on God Almighty to have mercy on the German people. More than 2 million German soldiers went to their deaths for the fatherland before me. I now follow my sons, all for Germany." Keitel was declared dead at 1:44 a.m. after struggling on the rope for approximately 24 minutes, making his time on the rope the longest among the condemned. The third man led to the gallows that cold October morning was Ernst Kaltenbrunner. He was one of the highest-ranking SS officers ever tried. Kaltenbrunner served as chief of the Reich Main Security Office, which put him in charge of the Gestapo, SD, and the concentration camp system after Reinhard Heydrich's assassination in 1942. Simply put, Kaltenbrunner had direct oversight over the machinery of death, mass arrests, torture chambers, and death camps like Mauthausen and Auschwitz. He knew all about them, and he gave the green light for every one of them to occur. At the Nuremberg trials, he was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, especially his role in the final solution, the systematic extermination of Jews. He tried to claim he didn't have direct control, but mountains of documents said otherwise. On October 16, 1946, at 1:39 a.m., Kaltenbrunner was hanged. Witnesses said he walked to the gallows without resistance. But when asked for any last words, he delivered a defiant message. "I have loved my German people and my fatherland with a warm heart. I have done my duty by the laws of my people, and I am sorry my people were led this time by men who were not soldiers, and that crimes were committed of which I had no knowledge. Germany, good luck." Despite the rope being dropped from a calculated height, Kaltenbrunner did not die instantly. Like many of the condemned that day, he slowly suffocated for around 11 to 13 minutes before finally being pronounced dead at approximately 1:52 a.m. Alfred Rosenberg was the 4th man to hang that night. Rosenberg was known as Nazi Germany's chief ideologue. He wasn't a general or a commander. He was the man behind the beliefs. Rosenberg wrote The Myth of the 20th Century, a book filled with dangerous racist theories. Hitler liked it so much, Rosenberg became one of the main architects of Nazi ideology, pushing anti-Semitism, Aryan supremacy, and hatred for Jews and Slavs into the heart of Nazi thinking. He also held a powerful position during the war. He was the minister for the occupied Eastern Territories. From that desk, he oversaw the looting of cultural treasures, the enslavement of civilians, and the deportation and murder of Jews, especially in places like Ukraine and the Baltic states. At the Nuremberg trials, he was convicted of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and conspiracy. Though not directly in the killing fields, his ideas and orders made those horrors possible. In the early hours of October 16, 1946, at exactly 1:45 a.m., Rosenberg was led to the gallows. He looked stiff and quiet. When the hangman asked if he had any last words, he simply said, "No." Then the trapdoor opened. Like the others, he didn't die instantly. Rosenberg's neck didn't break cleanly, and he suffered for approximately 10 to 13 minutes before dying from slow strangulation. The 5th man brought to the gallows was Hans Frank, known as the Butcher of Poland. once Hitler's personal lawyer, Frank rose to power after the invasion of Poland. He was appointed Governor-General of occupied Poland, making him the highest Nazi authority there. Under his rule, Poland became a nightmare of terror, home to the largest Jewish ghettos, forced labor camps, and most of the extermination camps, including Auschwitz and Treblinka. Frank oversaw the enslavement, starvation, and murder of millions, especially Jews and Poles. After the war, he claimed to have found religion in prison, carrying a Bible and expressing remorse. But that didn't change the fact that he helped organize one of the deadliest regions in Nazi-occupied Europe. At the Nuremberg trials, he was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Unlike others, Frank admitted guilt and repented, though many believed it was too little, too late. On October 16, 1946, at 1:55 a.m., Frank was led to the gallows. He walked quietly, carrying a small Bible, and his last words were, "I am thankful for the kind treatment during my captivity, and I ask God to accept me with mercy." The trapdoor opened, and just like the others, Hans Frank did not die instantly. His execution took approximately 13 minutes. His neck didn't break right away, and he slowly choked to death and was reported dead at 2:08 a.m. The sixth man to walk to the gallows was Wilhelm Frick, a name not everyone remembers today, but he helped shape Nazi Germany from the inside out. Frick was one of Hitler's earliest political allies, joining the Nazi Party when it was still small. After the Nazis seized power, Frick became the Minister of the Interior and later the Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, which meant he had real power over people's lives. His job was to turn democracy into a dictatorship. Frick wrote and pushed through many of the Nazi laws that destroyed civil rights, especially the Nuremberg laws, which stripped Jews of their citizenship and basic protections. He also helped build the legal framework for the Gestapo, concentration camps, and forced sterilizations of people considered unfit by Nazi standards. At Nuremberg, he was found guilty of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. While he wasn't a battlefield general, he gave the Nazis the laws to carry out their terror legally. That's what made him dangerous. Frick was hanged on October 16, 1946, the sixth man that night. He was described as stiff and emotionless as he climbed the gallows. When asked for final words, he said, "Long live eternal Germany." Reports say he took about 10 to 12 minutes to die. The seventh man to be hanged was Julius Streicher, one of the most hated figures in the courtroom, and not because he commanded troops or ran death camps. Streicher was a propaganda monster. He founded and ran Der Stürmer, a weekly newspaper filled with extreme anti-Semitic hate, false stories, and grotesque cartoons portraying Jews as evil. His writing poisoned millions of minds and helped justify the Holocaust, even if he never physically killed anyone himself. He was a fanatic, loud, vulgar, and obsessed with blaming Jews for everything. Even the other Nazis often distanced themselves from him. But Hitler liked Streicher's fire and gave him power to spread hate unchecked. At the Nuremberg trials, Streicher was found guilty of crimes against humanity for inciting genocide. His newspaper had called for the extermination of the Jews long before the killing began, and even in court, he remained defiant and delusional. When it was his turn on October 16, 1946, at 2:12 a.m., Streicher's final moments were chaotic. As he climbed the gallows, he hailed Hitler before suddenly saying, "Adele, my dear wife." Then, just before the hood went over his head, he yelled, "The Bolsheviks will hang you one day." And as the trapdoor opened, he reportedly screamed, "Purim Fest 1946, a strange reference to the Jewish holiday of Purim, which he twisted into a conspiracy theory, still trying to blame the Jews, even in death. Unlike others, Streicher's execution was especially brutal. Witnesses said he twisted and kicked violently for over 15 minutes. He was strangled to death slowly, gasping and jerking. Next to be executed was Fritz Sauckel, the man behind one of the largest forced labor programs in human history. Sauckel was Hitler's chief of labor deployment, appointed in 1942. His job was to supply the Nazi war machine with workers, and he did it with horrifying efficiency. Over 5 million people, mostly from Eastern Europe, were kidnapped from their homes and forced into labor in German factories, farms, and war zones. Many were teenagers. Many died from starvation, beatings, disease, or overwork. In his own words, he had a fanatical will to serve the Führer. He showed no remorse, claiming he had only followed orders and acted in Germany's interest. At the Nuremberg trials, Sauckel was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The evidence showed that millions of workers were treated like cattle, moved in trainloads, often shackled, beaten, and worked to death. On October 16, 1946, at around 2:26 a.m., Fritz Sauckel was taken to the gallows. He looked nervous, but kept his composure. When asked for his last words, he said, "I am dying innocently. The sentence is wrong. God protect Germany and make Germany great again. Long live Germany. God protect my family." Then, the noose was placed around his neck. Like most of the others that night, his death wasn't quick as he struggled for around 14 minutes before going still at around 2:40 a.m. The ninth man to face the gallows was Alfred Jodl, one of Hitler's top military planners, and a key figure in how World War II unfolded. Jodl served as chief of operations for the German Armed Forces High Command. That means he wasn't just a general. He was the man who signed off on nearly every major German military order directly under Hitler. From the invasion of Poland to the brutal campaigns in the Soviet Union, Jodl helped plan it all. He also signed orders that violated international laws, including the shooting of captured commandos and resistance fighters, and the deportation of civilians. He knew these acts were illegal, but carried them out anyway, claiming loyalty to the Führer above all else. At the Nuremberg trials, Jodl tried to paint himself as just a soldier following orders, but the court saw through it. He was convicted of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. On October 16th, 1946, at 2:34 a.m., Alfred Jodl was taken to the gallows. Witnesses described him as calm, tall, and composed. His final words were, "My greetings to you, my Germany." But like the others, Jodl did not die instantly. He struggled for 12 to 13 minutes, slowly choking to death as his body twitched above the trapdoor before going still at around 2:50 a.m. The last man to hang at Nuremberg on that grim October morning was Arthur Seyss-Inquart, a name many forget, but one who left behind a trail of blood and betrayal. Seyss-Inquart was an Austrian lawyer and Nazi loyalist. In 1938, he helped Hitler annex Austria into Nazi Germany, the infamous Anschluss. Hitler rewarded him by putting him in charge of occupied territories, including Poland, Austria, and later the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, Seyss-Inquart ruled with an iron fist. He sent over 100,000 Dutch Jews to concentration camps, most of whom never came back. He crushed resistance groups, executed hostages, and oversaw forced labor programs. He even approved mass deportations and executions right until the final months of the war. At the Nuremberg trials, he was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He tried to defend himself by saying he was just maintaining order, but the court rejected it. The evidence of deportations, mass murder, and terror was overwhelming. On that fateful October 16, 1946, Arthur Seyss-Inquart was the last to step onto the gallows. He was described as pale and nervous, but polite, with his final words being, "I hope that this execution marks the final act of the tragedy of the Second World War, and that the lesson learned from this war will be that peace and understanding should exist between peoples. I believe in Germany." And just like the others, his neck didn't break cleanly. Seyss-Inquart suffered for around 15 minutes, choking, twitching, and dying slowly in silence before finally going still at around 2:59 a.m. After the executions, the bodies of the 10 hanged men were transported to Munich. On October 17th, the remains were cremated at Ostfriedhof Crematorium. The ashes of all 11 executed men, including Göring, were scattered in the Isar River to prevent the establishment of any burial site that could become a shrine.